Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. We're leaving November for the cold of December and hoping that AppSec doesn't dim to an ember, that instead it burns brightly and begins to enshrine, that good security comes by default and design, that the page count of hardening guides will start dwindling, and that all those top 10 lists are used for just kindling. Which means this week we talk with John Kinsella on a theme of 6 months later to revisit some favorite articles and check back on whether some old AppSec news that promised to be interesting turned into a yay or a yawn. In the news segment, repeating that's beating ChatGPT, secure guidance for AI, logo fail takes a boot to the images in boot images, an alert for secure by design, and more. Light a fire and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
This is episode 265, recorded December 4th, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and as always this year, I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Where is that mute button? There it is. You know, I was just thinking, good morning. It's that time of day.
Good morning.
We need to do maybe we need to get our listeners to do a list of favorite, not so much stories, but favorite Mike intros, because I think that'd be sort of cool to see from people.
Ooh, that would be fun. Yes, let us know, because I haven't done a limerick in a while. So let me know if you like limericks. And I don't have the bravery yet to redo a Conan impression, but I have a few of my own favorites. But rather than entertain me, we should be entertaining our listeners. And John, this week we get to entertain our listeners with no announcements and no guest, because we're going straight into that topic that I mentioned 6 months later. This is something that you've been really good about. Like, we should think about this in 6 months, look back at this. And to frame this, to set this up a little bit, I like that attitude, because one of the things that we do try to do with the news is not just repeat the headlines and not just say, ooh, this is the cool thing this week, and then the next week, this is the next coolest thing in AppSec, and this is the next coolest thing in AppSec, and kind of have a bit of memory unsafety there, a bit of memory loss about, are we actually going anywhere with AppSec? Are we just repeating like DevOps, DevSecOps, BugOps, GitOps, all the ways that we can prefix ops? So in the spirit of that, you know, I have a couple of favorite articles looking back to 6 months as well as a year ago and more. But you have set us up on this path to pay attention to what we're actually reading. So maybe we should have you kick us off. What was one of those things that was a 6 months later?
Back to the earlier part of the year. Man, I got to tell you, I feel like I've been memory unsafe all year. I just hoping for a better 2024. Thank God for notes. Let's see if I go in sort of chronological
there
order.
We
go. You know, the first ones that caught my attention, and the first ones we talked about earlier in the year on ASW 230, late February, was the porting of the Unix shell fish to Rust. So I think this is probably one of my earlier, hey, let's go back and check in on this and see what's going on. Because the idea is a lot of things we cover are sort of maybe sometimes bleeding edge, but at least leading edge. And it's great to sort of talk about things and go, oh, wow, that's cool. But it's very easy for me, but also for a lot of open source developers or corporate developers to throw something out there. And either they lose interest in it, or it doesn't get the attention they want, or they realize how much work it's going to take, like porting a existing popular Unix shell written in C++ to a new language, not in a separate project, but in that project. And this is what the fish guys did. I don't think I realized that second part till I came back here and looked at it. So they actually just, perfect timing, guys. They had an update last week. They're saying that it is mostly done. They are literally doing this. So they would take a chunk of functionality and they would actually rewrite it in the existing GitHub project and then merge that in. So Fish Shell, if you've been running what I guess probably an unstable release this year, is a mixture of C++ and Rust. The build system is actually running Cargo as well as CMake and those type of things. So it's this pretty complex thing, the way they decided to do it. Not sure I would have done it that way, but I think that's, maybe it is a really great, I mean, this is the interesting part about this. Like, how would you do this? How would you go about this? And I think it's really neat to be able to go and watch this. The other interesting part about this to me, Mike, was they said that they think some of the early reports so far are showing decent performance. They think some parts of it might be up to 20% slower. And I don't think anybody would associate that with Rust. So I'm not sure if that's based on how they're linking or the, it's not ABI, I guess it'd still be API between the two languages, the callbacks. So it wasn't clear what was causing that, but they were sort of giving an early warning of, hey, it's not all going to be like, super turbo Rust shell. But yeah, that'd be my first one. What caught your eye from earlier in the year?
Yeah, and on that one too, thank you for leading with that one, because that's 10 months of work roughly. And I think one of the things that I'd be curious to look into deeper onto, but we don't have time because we have a bunch of articles, would be the amount of code and the amount of engineering hours it took in to do that. Because that I like to talk about the refactoring and rewriting, and I think we do have a theme of some Rust that we'll come back to as well. But this was a couple of programmers over 10 months, still not quite finished replacing that. But I think it's just a good reference for when we talk about bug bounties. This is how much we're awarding for finding bugs, but we don't have bounties on how much it costs or hours it takes to fix the bugs, let alone do a refactor, rewrite. But probably one thing that was on my list related to that was there was a new security developer in residence with support from Alpha Omega. This is one of those projects from the OpenSSF, the Alpha Omega project, kind of beginning to the end. They want to help secure, in this case, Python. So the PSF, the Python Security Foundation, hired Seth, I want to get his name right, Seth Michael Larson, and he's done some work. If you go to his blog, there are about half a dozen weekly updates as a security developer in residence, things that he's been working on, as well as a bunch of other really interesting things around the Python and package management. So it looks like the type of thing that we like to see, or we like to see from OpenSSF, which is investing in fixing things rather than just, here's some more vulns, here's some more vulns, we got another scanner for you, here's some more vulns. They're actually fixing something. So that was a great thing to see, that it was an investment that looks like has been paying off.
I think the way you said that is telling, probably. Like we try to, on this show, and we're going to probably talk about here in a little bit, we try to avoid the sort of, oh my God, rah-rah type, world is falling. But at the same time, we do try to talk about what's a new vulnerability, what's going on out there, what should we be thinking about in our workspace day to day, our open source projects. But how do you balance those two things between not just talking about rah-rah, but also, when does that thing get fixed? It's one thing to talk about, hey, there's a vulnerability, but what did you do with it? So yeah, good call out on that one. Let's see here. Another one I thought was really interesting was moving forward a whole month or two to April, ASW 235. We talked about Kate's GPT. So this is a GPT copilot specifically for Kubernetes, started by some of the folks in CNCF, I believe. Some of the contributors, not members, are not like employees, don't think. But anyways, it was off to a good start earlier in the year. It had this idea where you'd point it at your Kubernetes cluster and say, well, what's wrong? And it could do it across 2 or 3, I think at the time, different sort of areas of like, hey, your networking's not configured right, or that pod link doesn't have enough memory, or doing some things like that. So they've been going like gangbusters all year long. So they've got a nice solid history of commits out on GitHub, 3,500 stars. Quite a growing collection of things they're able to interact with within Kubernetes and say, hey, this is how you should be doing this, or this is your mistake, or things like that. So Yeah, it's a good example of, what I was talking about, the opposite of what I was talking about, where like instead of just someone releasing something and dropping it, it goes quiet, like actual continuing growing interest in it. So that's really neat to see.
Yeah, and I think, AI and LLMs were definitely a theme throughout the year. So also in April, there was a Glaze project that I thought was really cool. This was episode 237. We talked about it, which is basically intentional model poisoning, a way for artists to basically perturb their images that they're posting online. So then when generative AI comes to basically try to train on top of it, it can't reproduce it. So the Glaze project was pretty cool. And then there was actually another outcome of the project, additional work that we covered just a month or two ago as well. So it's one of those things that is interesting research. But I'm going to jump, since we're on to just talking about generative AI or LLMs, in June, also about 6 months ago, back in episode 243, John, there was yet another top 10 list. This was right after we did our own episode on top 10 lists about LLMs. So, lots of generative AI for the past 6 months, and unfortunately, I think for the next 6 months and longer.
It's really, I'm trying to use another word, interesting. I think anybody who is in, I know, it'd be interesting to hear from you or our listeners. My workplace, I'm surrounded by people talking about LLMs. Not every day, but like it's not uncommon to hear either it's being used for this or there are experimentations going on or what have you, right? Or even amongst my friends, poor bastards. But like, I think we're at a state that we feel there's a pulse in there somewhere. And it's like, okay, can we actually put our finger on and find out what's going on? And I think it's become easy enough to do, or easy enough to either train an LLM or spin some of these things up, that more and more people are at least tinkering with it. And I think that's good, right? Like I'm a very big fan of people getting their hands dirty and actually understanding what they can do with something versus looking at something from a distance and that's sitting on the academic ivory tower. So I think that's really neat. It's going to be, maybe we need to do a year or 2 years later version of this also, because where's this actually going to go? How much of it's going to get traction versus what's going to sort of get used for a while and people go, oh yeah, that's not actually going to work, and then it gets dropped. So I think that'll be curious to see where that goes. That'll be my new word, is curious, not go see. Maybe curious 6 months later for 2024. Starting to work on my resolutions. Let's see, moving forward, I've got a good one and a bad one. I'm feeling negative, so I'm going to go for the negative one. In August, so not quite 6 months, on ASW 251, I mentioned something called idx.dev from Google, their AI IDE, just staying with that trend. Checked back in this morning. Unfortunately, it's still waitlist only, so sad trombone on that one. But we've seen these come out now from, I think I can say anyone who has an IDE has some form of a magician beside it. I'll use that phrase and not go with anyone's branding. So again, there's potential there for this type of thing. I've been very fond this year of, I don't know about you, talking to developers and going, hey, have you used this? Is it plugged in? Do you like it? Are you ignoring it? And I get all sorts of mixed responses. It seems like from commercial software developers that I talk to, and this is again just my vision, not any one company, but commercial software developers I talk to are like, it's okay. I played with it once and I'm going back to my job. And I'm probably usually talking to more senior people. When I talk to people online, and people who are a little more hobbyists, it's a lot more, oh my God, I'm able to get so much more done. It's allowing me to really kill it. And I can't, some of these are people who have coded for 10, 20, 30 years. So it's not so much that they don't know how to code, but it seems like those who are professionally sitting at this desk day in, day out and actually writing software aren't quite as thrilled as those who maybe their day job is a security person or AppSec person or a producer or, what have you. And then they look and go like, wow, I'm able to crank out, I've coded before, but I can now crank out a bunch of code. So I think it's interesting to see how it's being used by different types of folks as well.
Yeah, and that's a great call out too, because I think a lot of my conversations with developers have been, the anecdotes have mostly come to, it's a fancy autocomplete, and it's either helpful because I just need to learn some of the syntax of a language I'm unfamiliar with. The call it the full stack programmers, for example. They're mostly working on the back end, but I need to do a little bit of front end JavaScript or something like that. So having some of that help seems nice for the boilerplate, some of the templating, things like that. So I'm glad you kind of picked a bit of a yawn there. Because one of the other things from, when was it, May of 2023, we covered an article about .zip TLD and a couple other new TLDs that were similar to file name extensions. And there was many, I'll say, talking heads were saying, phishing attacks will get worse. This will enable phishing. And I think at the time, hopefully I was kind of clear about yawn. And I think even now, 6 months later, it's still a yawn. The reason I wanted to pick this up is that if we're talking about new TLDs, or let me pull in talking about QR codes and how scary they are. But if it boils down to look at all the different ways we can have users click on links, maybe we should stop worrying about users clicking on links and revisit why we're actually worried about that. Is it because they're not using multi-factor authentication, FIDO keys, that type of thing? Is it because they just never patched their operating systems? That's the soapbox I wanted to throw up here, is that I hope in 6 months from now, we're not still covering articles that are saying, look at the smart way that AI can rewrite a phishing email or make it really hard to figure out if this is a safe link to click on or not, because we should be done with that argument within AppSec circles, I think.
Are you serious?
I said we should. I didn't say we will.
Yeah, no. It's funny you're making me think. Google, I think in the last few days, has announced a new, I guess AI they would call it. They've got a new way of calculating if an email is spam or not. So work is ongoing, and it seems like the way they've done it is not language specific. So out of the box, they're supporting over 100 different languages. By calculating vectors between characters. We'll see where it goes. I'm still seeing spam in my Gmail, so maybe it's not implemented yet. As you were saying that, I'm thinking, before you got to the tech part of it, I was thinking hey, it's leave the computers out of it. I think more and more of us know, with or without training, whatever the reason, when we see an email from something, that's probably not something I should be clicking on. I think most of us have a pretty good spidey sense about that. Let's say with 75% reliability, maybe even say 60% reliability. But just due to the fact that there's still so much clickbait and, well, not clickbait, spam and phishing attacks and this type of thing out there, it tells me that even though we know, people are still clicking on links. So the question then is, okay, I guess you have to rely on tech to do it somehow to prevent it. I don't know. I'm sort of unfortunately pessimistic on this one. It's human nature social engineering survives on human nature's interest in curiosity about something, whatever the driver is behind that, and being able to somehow stay a step ahead with the tech on it, I think is going to be unfortunately an ongoing thing. So I love your train of thought, but we'll see if it bodes out. Wow, I really am going negative here. Let's see. How about something positive? So this is sort of positive. We talked about Tetraburst in ASW 248 back in July. Is that 6 months? I think close. No, maybe not quite. My math is off. But I think we had maybe one or two follow-ups on this. Later in the year, I believe it was end of October, probably right around Halloween, ESTI, the company behind that, or organization behind Tetra, announced they were going to actually open source the Tetra encryption primitives. So that's a yay. On the other hand, I can't find that code online anywhere yet. So I guess they're still sort of figuring out exactly what an encryption primitive is, or maybe they're looking for the source code, or they're learning how to use GitHub or something. I'm not quite sure what, but we're not quite there yet. So the thought's positive. It's interesting. Those many stories I looked through here, Mike, is just going through this list of trying to figure out what would be interesting to talk about. There was several of things just sort of went quiet. And again, like I said, sometimes it could be a GitHub thing. Sometimes it could be a commercial company that, one example coming to head, They had a garage door controller, which with Wi-Fi, they just decided to turn off Wi-Fi because it had a vulnerability. They're still selling it, but it's not clear they patched it. So are they selling it with Wi-Fi turned off? There's been no new blog posts in like 2 years. So it's like some of these things are sort of not great. So it's nice to see Tetraburst or ESTI actually at least going in the right direction. So kudos for that. Hopefully that will become in the public domain pretty soon. We'll get to see what's going on behind the scenes and hopefully help them out.
Yeah, and who knows? Everybody's still having fun with their flipper zeros and garage door openers, I suppose. Speaking of organizations, we started this year talking about the open source software security mobilization plan. This is something from OpenSSF, and I mentioned another article from OpenSSF, their investments with Python, a bunch of other fuzzing that they've done. But there's also a lot of interesting things. I'll choose that word since you took curious. Between OpenSSF and OWASP, for example, we talked with Simon about Zap, the history of Zap, as well as Zap was something that moved from as an OWASP project into OpenSSF. And so it's interesting to watch these two organizations where they're figuring out their future to be and both their membership and their funding models. And they're taking different choices. Different is a neutral word I'm going to use here. But I have to say, I think this won't come as too much of a surprise. For all the fun we've been making of top 10 lists, this year at least, 2023, I've really liked a lot of the investments and the results that we've seen from OpenSSF, and kind of still looking for OWASP to grab my attention, I'll say, on a personal note.
Man, where did I see it recently? I'm not going to remember. There was something I've seen in the last, call it month or so, where a organization, they wanted to do AppSec training, and they took OWASP top 10 as a base. But the way it was written was really interesting. Man, I wish I'd sort of scribbled this down. I don't know where it is, but they, instead of saying we are teaching you OWASP top 10 or anything like that, they're saying we need to start somewhere. This is the base we're starting from. This is a known set of 10 things. We're going to take this list and then dive into and talk about them. But they were very clear how they did it. It was really I don't want to call it a light bulb moment, but it was really interesting to see. Hey, that completely makes sense. I get it. Cool. Great way to start. We've talked, I don't want to say negative, but definitely not super positive about OWASP, I think, as an org this year. As I said, what I just said, they're the sort of granddaddy at this. They're the ones that have sort of driven and pushed and got us all going in this direction. So I've got to give still props and kudos and all that for that. I think when we've talked to multiple OWASP people this year, they all, I think, are trying to go in the right direction. I think it's sort of, I don't want to say politics, but I think it's sort of an organizational thing of like, where do you really want to point that large ship and how do you want to do it? And that's something that I don't think you can even change in a year. I think there's definitely some folks there that don't want to change at all. I think there's some that do, and we're seeing some of those move around. It's a really tough thing if you're inside an organization, any big, small, private, corporate, whatever, to try and change something, right? Like how do you influence when you don't have influence? So I think we'll have to keep watching and see how it goes. It's very easy for us to talk. I don't want to say negative, but it's what's in my mind is like, and I've said it before, how OWASP looks compared to how OpenSSF looks. Just the look and feel of the site sort of, to me, says a lot. But I don't want to be stuck on like that sort of basic thing. It's like they're still doing a ton of really great stuff. And on the negative side, it's, as I was saying, they've got a lot of projects which they've started and just sort of fizzled out because there wasn't that interest there. But they're trying, and they're. It seems like in many ways they're still trying to do the right thing. It still doesn't sound positive. I'm sorry, but like I don't know. I'm very curious to keep supporting and keep watching them over the next many years, actually.
Indeed, and there was the RFI from CISA about secure by design, or in the White House about the future of open source software, and both OpenSSF and OWASP had responses, and OWASP was definitely leaning into the education and awareness aspect. So maybe that's where they're going to carve out their future and focus on, here is education, and I'll cross my fingers, here's education for AppSec folks as well as developers. And we had a theme of, we also talked with a couple of different guests, a couple of repeat guests. Josh Goldberg came and visited us a couple of times about presentations. And one of the reasons was to start to have AppSec folks talk to developers. So, show up at developer conferences. So maybe that's one of those areas it'd be great to see OWASP have some more, call it mandates or investments in. But in terms of, yet again, other organizations doing lots of things. We've seen Rust show up everywhere, but especially in Microsoft. Microsoft has embraced it, and just recently, we were covering their talks about rewriting Windows code into Rust way back in May, and now they did announce their Secure Future Initiative, which is very much about memory safety. And I wanted to also put in 2 years ago. We talked in episode 177 about Rust showing up in the Linux kernel, which was roughly a year's worth of effort, even just to get the build framework set up. So even when you're talking, when you started us off about the fish shell, just getting the CMake to cargo and everything like that, there's effort just to be able to compile your code rather than just rewrite it in the first place. And I know you've got also a couple things Rust related, as well as just memory safety in general.
Yeah, I'm going to go back. I'm doing time-wise. Okay. There's two more I want to hit. So I'm going to get to memory safety. But first, I want to go back to ASW 238. I don't know my date on this one, but that's got to be back in March-ish, I'm guessing. CodeQL came out with their Wall of Fame. And I think, I went back and looked at this. So it's, we'll have to link in the show notes for those who can't get there with the Googles. And, really, they've been posting stuff all year long. So as new vulnerabilities of, I'll say note, I know they're not doing everyone, but as a new vulnerability of interest comes out, they'll throw a blog up on it or add it to the Wall of Shame, however you want to call it, Wall of Fame, excuse me. And, I just started looking through and seeing all the stuff they're doing every week or 2-3 weeks, sort of putting something out. And I was thinking, if I really wanted to dive in and focus on CodeQL and really learn it well, I'd probably spend a day or two just going through that and seeing how they're writing stuff and how they're being done. So kudos for them on that, not just to, be updating their libraries behind the scene or their collection of rules, but to actually be talking through what's going on, what they're doing. So I thought that was really neat.
That is cool. And cool to see that's covering, they're covering a bunch of different languages through CodeQL too. So, just to reinforce the point, CodeQL isn't beholden to just JavaScript or Python, Ruby, et cetera. So it definitely does read like an OWASP top 10 list of issues that they're finding, but nice and informative, as you say. And that one, what was the other one that was also on your list before we get to some more memory safety?
I think the other one on my list is memory safety. Yeah, we can go there. This is going to sound like an ad, as we were joking beforehand, but it's really not. So where this came from, in ASW 254, we talked about sudo rs in September 11th being released. And then I believe probably about 4 episodes later, there was a bug in there we talked about a few weeks ago. But I thought this is one of those ones that sort of caught our attention. And we've talked about memorysafety.org quite a lot in the show. So when I was looking at sudo rs on their initiative page, I'm like, well, what else are they working on? And I took sort of a step back and what have these guys been doing? I'm not going to hit all of them, but just sort of going through the list. Rust TLS is out there and active. Development is slowed down, but I think that's because it's reached a decent point. You just talked about Rust in the Linux kernel. They've been working with something called AV1, Rustifying a Video Codec. We were talking earlier about all the issues we see around not just images, but also video, and how difficult that is to do that right. We talked about sudo, but actually they're not just doing sudo, they're doing sudo and su, which I think is really interesting because that's sort of even more mission critical to me. If I have to use su, I need that to work, right? So that's usually my last ditch effort before I go looking for a console. Let's see, Rust, an NTP version of Rust a Rust version of NTPD, not NTP, is complete and under audit. So time systems, mod TLS. So they have created a sort of a rewrite of mod SSL, but in Rust, calling it mod TLS for HTTPD. That seems like it's doing well. So they're starting to think about what other Apache modules could they rewrite. They've got a DNS project out there. They just renamed it, but I left the name out of my notes. They've been doing work with curl. And then here's the advertisement part, but I promise this is not based on anything. They're taking contributions. Because at this point, I started curious. I'm like, man, these guys are doing a bunch of stuff. Like, can anyone just add into it? Or is this like a close group of friends? Because as you read through this list of things it's talking about, they have updates in each one about how they hired this person and they did this much work and this type of thing. I'm like, okay, well, is it only being done by themselves or what's going on? Or how if I, presuming I had time, could I go and help with this type of thing? So I started looking around and found their contribution page. So they will take contributions of code. They will also take stock transfers, crypto, cash, and donations from larger corporations. So including the one thing caught my eye, different from Apache, they will take directed donations. And for those who aren't familiar with Apache and directed donations, the ASF, if a corporation wants to give money, they cannot say how it will be used. This is a very it's a thorn in many people's side because a lot of large corporations say we want to donate money, but we want to be used on this project, and ASF tries to stay neutral, which is I get it. They'll say no, that's not possible. But the folks in memory safety will happily be told what to do with your money. So I just thought that was pretty neat. They're doing a bunch of great stuff, but that was my wrap up for the 6 months.
I'm trying to think where else have we heard about a nonprofit operating a for-profit company or a profit-capped company in the news lately. But I don't want to have to start us way back into AI discussions again. I was curious too. You went through a fun list, and these were fundamental things: NTPD, mod TLS, DNS. They're not going to rewrite curl, and we've actually covered why. Daniel doesn't want to rewrite curl outside of C, but I'm curious if somebody did have some directed donations that were headed to the Mr. Kinsella bank account. What would you be wanting to work on, or what would you propose as one of those next consequential things that would be a Rust rewrite, perhaps?
The one I want to say is sort of horrifying, but that's what's interesting about this list. Anyone who's ever used NTPD, it's very picky and it's a very complex protocol underneath the hood. SSL, TLS, we all know about how complex those things are. They sound simple until you dig into them. DNS, again, we've talked about this multiple times. It sounds like it's a very simple thing. But so the one that pops in my mind, Mike, I almost sort of don't want to say it. How about a Rust-based browser?
Wow. Well, Firefox, Mozilla did start off a lot of the adoption of Rust with putting that into, some of their parsing areas. But that's a lot of code to refactor into Rust. That's for sure.
Okay, maybe we'll start with the JavaScript engine. We'll just rewrite that in Rust. We'll start with that one. It's funny. We haven't been talking a lot about JavaScript this year, at least I don't think.
No. And one of the things I wanted to on that theme was WebAssembly. I love some of the concepts of WebAssembly, some of the promises of it from its sandboxing. We've seen types of vulnerabilities throughout the year that could have just been eradicated, the class of vuln, because of sandboxing, because of WebAssembly that doesn't have access to a file system, doesn't have network access, or can be, it has better just better safety guarantees or security guarantees than JavaScript does. But unfortunately, it seems to be going slow. There's adoption in some places, but other than some fun demos of running was it Doom or Quake in your browser, I haven't found in some other games, I haven't found some really great motivating use cases for WebAssembly yet that people are really pointing to.
One or two things caught my eye when I was going back looking over the year. And man, it was interesting going back through this. I hope this sort of tickled some of our listeners' brains. Looking through how much stuff we've covered this year and how long how long this year's been. I did see a few WASM ones, but none of them really sort of felt to me like, let's look at this 6 months later. So does that mean I mean, yeah, let's put John on the psychologist couch. Does that mean I think it's sort of a stable thing, or it's either it's not gaining traction or it's just doing its own thing? I mean, that's not the case. We've had WASM stories recently, but for whatever reason, they didn't really sort of reach out and say, hey, let's go back and look at what's going on with this.
Yeah, and it may be a lot of WASM is sort of like WebSockets came and is still used, but it's more of the plumbing, if you will, of just doing some very very specific targeted types of image filters, that type of thing. But that does give us a good. It's been a long year, as you said. We don't want to make this too long of a segment, so we will have to, as I can speak, come back in 2024 with what we were looking for the year to come. But I think right now, John, we should take a break and come back with some news. But before we take that break, as always, I want to say thank you for this chat. Thank you for the check on 6 months later. We're going to have to check in 6 months from now again to see what else is grabbing your attention.
Sounds good.
Also want to thank all of our listeners. And as I mentioned, we got to take that quick break and return with news of the week.